Good. Let's check. Yeah, afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the Atlantic Council. Thanks very much for coming. I'm Steve Grundman, the Lund Fellow for Emerging Defense Challenges here at the Council. I'm the producer of this Captains of Industry series. Our purpose this afternoon is to hear from Mike Petters, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Huntington Ingalls Industries, who will make an address entitled Playing the Long Game. Following Mike's prepared remarks, I will join him on the platform to lead a discussion and then moderate questions from the audience. Before we cast off into the substance of this afternoon's event, I have a couple of administrative notes. First, the entire event is public on the record, and we are live streaming it over our website. So if I call upon you during the Q&A portion to ask a question, please wait for the microphone, wait for one of our staff members to bring you the microphone, and identify yourself and your affiliation clearly before asking your question. Second, we are tweeting this event at the hashtag ACCOI and can even receive questions over that channel that you may want me to, on your behalf, if you're out in the Twitter sphere, convey to him, which my staff will bring up to me on a piece of paper. Finally, I want to underscore that the event must conclude by 1:15. Mike Petters' appearance here is the 11th in this Captains of Industry series, the purpose of which is to make available a prominent platform from which senior executives whose businesses contribute to national security can address the public interests their companies serve and the public policies that shape their markets. Among those who have preceded Mike on this stage are Dave Melcher, the CEO of Excelis, who launched the series a little over a year ago, the CEO of United Launch Alliance, Tori Bruno, who spoke just last month, and I know several of you in the room today were here for that address, and another who is himself here in the audience today, former Deputy Secretary Bill Lynn, who is now the CEO of Finmeccanica North America and DRS Technologies. Thanks for coming, Bill. By engaging the perspectives of these business leaders, our Captains of Industry series is cultivating a constituency, I hope, for finding practical solutions to the challenges and opportunities that lie at the interface of defense ministries and industries. Mike's address is entitled Playing the Long Game, which I have come to understand he employs as a metaphor for redressing a wide range of problems he sees threatening our national security and economic prosperity. Building a better bridge between business and government requires that we, he says, play the long game. So too does building the infrastructure of our foreign relations and recapitalizing the human resources we have to do science, technology, engineering, and math in our technology industries. I obviously will permit Mike to elaborate on this theme himself, but will confess off the top that I am myself highly susceptible to this slogan as some kind of a touchstone of corporate strategy as well as government industrial policy when it comes to defense in the 21st century. I now want to invite to the stage Mark Brunner to introduce our featured speaker. Mark is the senior advisor to Virginia Senator Mark Warner and is the Senator's principal legislative aide on matters concerning defense, foreign policy, and energy. Before joining the Senator's staff, Mark was a U.S. Navy officer, a career that involved him in a wide range of assignments that included flying helicopters in the Arabian Gulf and advising the U.S. mission to the European Union. Important to us here at the Council, Mark is also a member longstanding of the Council. He has known Mike Petters, as you can imagine, the Virginia Senator's legislative aide for defense might have come to do for some time, and I thank you, Mark, for coming here today to add a personal touch to our introduction of Mike Petters, our speaker. Mark?
Great, thanks, Steve. And I just want to be sure it's clear that it's not a requirement that the Virginia Senator's legislative aide introduce Mike Petters, that this is something I was enthusiastic about doing. But Steve, I appreciate, too, this series of events on, especially on defense acquisition, where I think you've been ahead of the curve at rethinking how we buy weapons and also what the long-term implications are for the industrial base. So it's a terrific series. I try to make as many of these as I can, and as you know, getting off the hill, getting downtown is not easy, but I always make this a priority, so appreciate that you've continued to invite me. But today I want to introduce Mike Petters, the President and CEO of Huntington Ingalls. Mike serves as the President of one of the largest manufacturing companies in America. HII has almost $7 billion in annual revenues and employs 38,000 people in Virginia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and California. He's responsible for leading the design, construction, and overhaul of ships, submarines, and aircraft carriers, as well as a number of other business lines that he runs. Mike graduated from the Naval Academy, is a former submariner, and he began his business career in 1987 when he joined the Los Angeles-class submarine construction division at Newport News Shipbuilding. Mike holds an MBA from William & Mary and is an executive committee member of both the Aerospace Industries Association and vice chairman of the Virginia Business Council. Now, the title of Mike's address today is The Long Game, and we couldn't have a better speaker on this topic. While many of us in D.C. are focused on short-term budget gymnastics like annual sequestration cuts, continuing resolutions, and cromnibuses, Mike has the challenging task of trying to keep his head down and chart a sustainable course that delivers a product whose development and construction spans multiple budget years and several Congresses. Again, aircraft carriers are 50-year platforms. And to do this, Mike has been a proponent of innovative financing. In fact, when I first met him, I was on the staff of Senator John Warner from Virginia about a decade ago, and he was talking about how the government could save a lot of money with multi-year buys on this new program called the Virginia-class submarine. Well, I'm happy to announce that this year, partly due to Mike's diligent efforts and his partnership with the Navy, that the Navy signed the largest contract in its history for 10 Virginia-class submarines, and the cost savings on this one multi-year buy were so significant that essentially we bought 9 subs and got 1 for free, which is not a bad deal for the taxpayers. Mike was also a great partner for Senator Warner and I when we were hit in January with the unwelcome news that the administration was going to retire one of our aircraft carriers. We worked with Mike and his team to fight for the refueling of the George Washington, and I'm proud to say that last night the Appropriations Committee agreed to add almost $1 billion to refuel the George Washington and ensure we get the full service life out of this national asset. So without further ado, Mike Petters.
Well, thanks, Mark. I appreciate those very kind remarks, and none of that happened because of anything that I particularly did, but we have a great team involved with great issues, and that comes to pass. But this idea that we're getting 10 submarines for the cost of 9, or that we're getting 1 free, while it may be mathematically true, my friends in New York on Wall Street may not like to hear it that way. So we might want to find a little bit of a different slogan. And Steve, I want to thank you for inviting me. We were at a dinner about a month ago, and we started having a conversation. And next thing I know, I got a phone call and said, "Hey, can you come do this?" and carry that conversation on. And the conversation we were having was, what's your horizon? How do you make decisions, and do you make decisions based on short-term pressures or long-term views? And so that's sort of the genesis of this. And I also applaud you and this organization for the series, because I do think that you know, people need to be heard. Sometimes in Washington, I've heard an expression that all the things have been said, but not all the people that need to say it have said it yet. So some of this, is, I'm afraid, is going to come across as being things that have been said before. It's just add me to the list of people who are saying some of the same things again. On the other hand, maybe we can have a conversation about some more tangible activity that could come out of this. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy to engage with you. You know, I think one of the things that, you know, sort of in the aftermath of the most recent election, I think it's kind of interesting to kind of watch and see how people have responded to this. If I could have my druthers, I think that I would go to the dictionary people and I would take the word mandate and cross it out of the system and not ever let anybody ever use that again, particularly in the political sphere. Because I think that to read that you have 1 vote more than the other person as a mandate is a very, very dangerous thing to do for a politician, but I think it's very dangerous for the country as well. You know, we've had some events here over the past several couple of months where we are reminded, whether you think about what's happened in Missouri or in New York or even across some of our other fine institutions, you're reminded that it really is an act of faith for the 49% to allow the 51% to govern. That's truly an act of faith. And that, I think, is one of those things that sets America apart from just about anywhere else in the world. Because if you're in the 49% in any other country, in some countries, that means you can go get your guns. And it creates a real challenge. And so if you are in that place, why would the 49% allow the 51% to govern? Because the 49% believe in the process, they believe in they believe that there's fairness, they believe that there's equity, they believe they will be heard, and they believe that there will be engagement. And so as long as you have those things in place, you can create a coalition or cohesion to move forward that is not in the definition of mandate. And so I think that that's one of the things that this election has kind of taught me, or that I've seen happen here. And my hope is that going forward, we will move beyond this idea that somebody, that there's a mandate on one side or the other. In fact, we were at the Reagan Forum a couple of weeks ago. I had the chance to be on a panel, and I pointed out that I really don't think that the current election was about picking Republicans over Democrats. I think it was a message from the electorate to say, we're interested in economic growth and we're interested in creation of jobs, and we're not happy with what we've had so far, so we're going to let the other guys do that for a little while. But be aware that if the other guys don't get this right, we'll try something else. And so I think that going into it with that spirit can create an opportunity for cohesion. In the main, I think that we actually have an incredibly good process. Our process for setting national priorities and applying resources against those priorities has served us very, very well. It's painful to participate in, as Mark was talking to. You have to engage. It's not a passive process. It's an emotional process. Frankly, it's pretty ugly to watch sometimes. But in the main, we end up with a reasonable set of priorities, and we end up with a reasonable set of resources to apply to those priorities. And so one of the things, if you're going to play the long game and you're going to do this right relative to our government and our society, is you've got to allow that process to work. And quite frankly, for the last couple of years, we haven't. We've been in a place where we've said we're going to do things by formula. And instead of doing 9 out of 10 things, which every household in America would do if they had to tighten their budgets, we're going to do 90% of everything, which is a really tough environment for us to be in. It's a little trite to say it's hard to build 90% of a ship, but in fact, it's really hard to build 90% of a ship. And as Mark pointed out and Steve pointed out as well, we are building platform today. We're building units on the John F. Kennedy, the CVN 79. The Kennedy will deliver to the Navy in the early 20s. It will come back in the mid to late 40s to the shipyard to be refueled. And it will come back to the shipyard in the early 70s to be inactivated. Now, I grant you that my horizon is probably a lot further out than just about anybody else's. But what does it take to be successful when you have to push your horizon out there? I think leaders have to understand that they are, in just about any circumstance, the leader of an organization has to have the longest view of anybody in that organization. Everybody around the leader will have a shorter view. They will have pressures on them that are going to push them to say, you need to do this by Friday, you need to do this by next month, or whatever it is. The leader is the one that has to stay the course and have eyes on the horizon, whatever that horizon is. Now, my horizon is out to the 70s, but I understand there can be businesses where the horizon might be to the end of the month. But you need to have an idea of where that horizon is, and then focus on it. When we think about where we are in the national security arena, though, let's think a little bit about who those stakeholders are. Stakeholders are, clearly the Pentagon is our customer, and the Congress as our representative of the taxpayers. And those of us that are in the business of national security never ever forget that that's who we're working for. Think about the institutionalization of things in that environment that are driving everybody to be short-term focused. Our customer, frankly, the Navy has a 30-year plan, which is a godsend relative to what a lot of the other services have and a lot of the other companies have to deal with. But that plan changes every year and a half, 2 years. It moves around a little bit. So it's notional and directional, and it's not decisional. We talk about budgets. If you think about how a business operates, we operate in an environment where we make investments and we look for returns. And if you think about how our customer and how our Congress operates, we'll establish a budget and we'll measure expenses against that budget. Good programs are identified as programs that run under budget. Now think about what that means for a minute. If I have a department in my organization and I said, okay, your budget for the year is $1,000, and towards the end of the year, the department manager has spent $900. Now, he comes in at $900 for the end of the year. He's a great leader and a great manager. But if he took $100, and let's say this was 2005, if he took that $100 and instead of giving it back and being a hero in 2005, he had gone out and bought stock in Apple. Well, he wouldn't be a hero in 2005, but by 2014, he would have an investment that would have paid many, many times over his budget. And so there is a contrast between thinking short-term and thinking long-term. And I think the real challenge that businesses have is that we think about everything in terms of investment and return, and our customer and the taxpayers think about it in terms of budget and expense. And where that intersects in our business, that intersects in the contracts that we sign. And so the people that are working on those contracts actually have to understand that they're doing a translation. That can be very, very challenging. And I frankly think that as we move forward, I think that's going to become even more of a challenge. Budget pressures are going to create incentives for contracts to have a little bit more scope, a little bit less fee. Maybe we'll incentivize a quarter of a point less on fee return, but that's the investment return that's needed to sustain the business going forward. And that can be, heroes today create problems for tomorrow. Now, you take the business and you think about our customers and the political environment and turn that around and think about who our owners are and think about what drives them. I read over the weekend that half of the shares that trade on the exchange today will be traded by high-frequency traders. Now, high-frequency traders serve a purpose. They create liquidity, and they do lots of things to allow the efficient allocation of capital, which is really a miracle in this country. But at the same time, high-frequency traders are not terribly interested in what I have to say about strategy or where the company might be in 2016 or 2020 or that delivery of the ship in 2022. They're interested in what the price says today. And that's an interesting thing to think about, is what the price is, because if you have perfect knowledge of everything that's going on inside of a company, and you have perfect knowledge of everything that can happen to that company, you can come up with what the value of that company is. No one has that knowledge. No one. Not even me. And so, in some ways, the stock price that shows up on any given day is not really the value of your company. It really is an opinion about the value of your company. Right? And so as the opinions move up and down, people are trading on the change in opinion. In the meantime, there are a lot of things you can do to influence that. You can buy back shares, you can raise your dividends, you can do lots of stuff that will actually affect the perceived value of your company. But they may not be doing they're not investments necessarily that are creating new value inside of your business. And that's an environment that we're all struggling with right now, because it becomes really hard for us to describe what we're doing that's an over-the-horizon description of our strategy. It becomes really hard to talk to that when when you're getting literally instantaneous feedback on what's happening with your share price. And so the lens of value, the institutionalization of the short term, high frequency trading is, down to nanoseconds. You get weekly reports from comparisons to how you did each week to all the other companies in your industry. You have quarterly earnings reports. You have annual reports that come out. If you're building a product that takes 8 years to build, and you have a 1-year annual incentive program that you're trying to work with your shareholders to incentivize your workforce, you got to make sure the folks in your organization don't try to maximize this year at the expense of next year. That's the leadership challenge. So as you think about where your horizon is and what all these pressures are, we can go on for as long as you like about all the different pressures. I thought I'd share is how I think you have to think through this as a leader of an organization. Number one, you have to think that you're the longest person, you have the longest horizon in the room, and that you're going to have a view that is about creating value in your organization that is longer and farther out than anyone else. Number two, you have to really decide on what are the things that you really believe in. Now, I'll tell you what I really believe in, but I think this is fair game. Any leader can do this. When I was at the Reagan Forum, one of the things I saw in the library was that Ronald Reagan, underneath everything else that he had to say or did, the one thing that was his touchstone was that he believed in the human dignity of every single individual person. Whether you were a rocket scientist or a painter or a cleaner or an engineer, it did not matter. There was dignity in that person, and there was value in that person, and that sort of was the foundation of his philosophy of the world. My view is I won't say that the president was an inspiration for me, but as I saw that, I thought about it made me think about what are the things that I believe in. The first thing that I believe in is that everybody that comes through the gates of our business every single day wants to do a good job. And the challenge for the leadership team is to make sure that we do everything we can to give them every opportunity that we can for them to do their very best work. Now think about that for a minute. What does that mean? That means they have to have tools. That means we have to invest in the capital for their success. But it goes beyond that. We have decided, for instance, that we're going to put health clinics in our business. We've decided that we're going to allow those clinics to support our folks, and they're going to be right on site so that our folks can use them without having to take a day off to go to the doctor, and their families will use them. Now, what have we done there? There's sort of the magician. The right hand is the one he wants you to watch, but pay attention, really watch the left hand because that's where all the action is. What's going on there? Number one, we care about our employees. Number two, we're investing in them. Number three, we want to capture the return on that investment, and we want them to help us capture that return. Now here comes the left-handed part of the magician's thing. Number four, we're breaking the fee-for-service model of medicine because doctors will be on salary to us, which means that they don't have to go and spend 6 minutes with a patient. Every 6 minutes get a new patient so that they can make their numbers for the day. They get 30 minutes with an employee. And if they have 30 minutes with an employee and they have a discussion with the employee and they say, look, you probably ought to give up smoking, or you need to probably walk around the block 3 times a week. And that turns into a health consciousness in one of our employees that means that that person is a productive member of our society and a productive worker for this business for a couple of more years. That's really, really good for us. And so that's just one example of how we take this view that I don't know where the healthcare system is going to go. I think there's as many opinions about that as there are people in the city. But I know what's right for our business is that we're investing in our folks. We want to give them an opportunity to capture the investment on that, capture the return on that investment, and we're going to sustain that and create a sustainable approach for going forward. Beyond that. The other thing that I believe in, if I believe that everybody that comes through my gates every day wants to do a good job, the second thing that I believe in, it probably is more about my leadership style than anything else, is that when the shipyards decide that they want to do something, it gets done. And the challenge of the leadership team is to persuade, cajole, whatever you want to call it, get to the point where the shipyard decides that it wants to do something. It's not enough to stand up and say, we need to go over to the right. If President Teddy Roosevelt, if he had decided to go up San Juan Hill and no one had ever followed him, what would have happened? I'm not sure how that would have turned out. The thing about the shipyard is there's so much deep talent in what we do that when the shipyard as an organization decides that we're going to go to the right, we go there better than anybody else. And so for me, it's always been about make sure that you do the kinds of things that are going to create support. And what I found is that's actually true whether you're talking about inside of my business or outside of the business. And Mark talked about a couple of the things that, whether it's multi-year procurement for Virginia-class submarines or multi-year procurement for aircraft carriers, or the engagement, the full court engagement on the value of 11 carriers in the fleet, or the discussion that we've been having for the last year about amphibs and the amphibious industrial base. All of that requires, it's not enough to just stand up and say that's the way we're going. It does require you to go out and create support and get the institution to believe that that's the right direction to go. And when that happens, then good things happen. And I think that long game leaders have got to become, to be a successful long game leader, you have to understand that and be willing to put the energy into it to go create those kinds of long-term coalitions. So with that, I'm going to stop at that point and open it up to our discussion and questions. And I appreciate the chance to be here, and thank you for your time.
Great. If you could sit right there. That's terrific, Mike. Thank you very much. That, again, you're not the first to exemplify what I'd hoped this series would draw out of senior business leaders whose businesses affect national security. That was right on the mark. So let's develop some of what you've said and raise a couple other things. Your introduction, I mentioned that you were a Naval Academy graduate and a naval officer, but what I want to know is, how'd you get in this business? It turns out to be an interesting answer when I ask, typically. How did you get in this business?
When I was making the transition from the Navy to a career outside of that, being nuclear trained, I had a chance to go work in the power companies, and when I interviewed with the folks at Newport News, I actually saw an opportunity to do more than just be an engineer inside a reactor. Mm-hmm. And I went to Newport News thinking that I'll use this platform of what I know how to do to pursue an MBA, and which is William Mary's right there. And so we did that. And in the course of pursuing my MBA, Newport News decided to throw bigger and bigger jobs at me. And so, once you buy your second set of steel toes in the shipyard, you're a lifer. And I'm on about number 4 at this point. So
okay, that's the mark. You alluded to the dinner where you and I first started talking, and the formulation of your business's strategy. It's the way I heard it. I'll let you decide if that's the way you want to articulate it. But the formulation that really struck me was, my words now, I'm not a shipbuilder. I'm a company that does engineering processes. And I'd ask you if you could develop that. Yeah, because I think it's interesting.
You have to kind of think about who you are. And when you see or think about the shipyards, the first thing you think about are the big cranes and the big ships and all the great folks that do that work. And they are the heart and soul of who we are. But behind all of those folks, all of the welders and the painters and the riggers and the machinists, behind those folks are the engineers. And it turns out that we're a really big engineering company. We have 5,000 engineers and designers in shipbuilding. And what we found over the past 3.5 years since we left Northrop Grumman, we've been going through a process. We're closing the shipyard in Avendale. Mm-hmm. And we started that process. It's a grueling, terrible process to go through. We started that process with 5,000 employees there. And we actually started trying to figure out how do we redeploy our manufacturing employees into a new space, because that's what our opportunity was. And we've been, I'd say, completely unsuccessful at that. What we also found, though, was that when we brought our engineers to talk to engineers in other spaces, it takes about a minute for them to get synced up and start using the same language and talking about all the same things. Mm-hmm. And so what we've come to realize in that process, this is not one of those things where I just had a blinding, vision of this. This is one of those brute force recognitions, is that we really are an engineering company that makes a lot of really cool stuff. And our engineers do really cool stuff. And now when you step back and think about, okay, you're an engineering company, who are you providing that for? Well, we only have one channel. Our one channel for our engineering capability is towards the Pentagon. And if you're any company and you have one channel for your product, and that customer or that channel is, pick your choice. It's flat, it's capped, it's uncertain, however you want to put it. You need to think about how do you open other channels. And I think everybody in every business is always trying to figure out how do I open another channel. For us, we decided that we could open another channel for that engineering capability in a place where there's a high demand for engineers. Today, we've been doing work with the Department of Energy, taking advantage of our nuclear capability inside of Newport News. We've been on a team with Fluor down at Savannah River, supporting that team for, that's probably been 6 or 8 years now. And that's going really well. But we have, as we've tried to pursue other opportunities in the Department of Energy space, we have organically been almost completely unsuccessful. Mm-hmm. And what we found was we have this tremendous capability and we have this tremendous depth, but we don't really have any access. And in January, we acquired a SM Stoller Corporation, which is a small engineering services firm. They have 25, they are on site on 25 DOE sites. Their biggest issue on a day in and day out basis is staffing. And so if you take, to borrow some phrase, some terms, if you take 25 sites of bandwidth and you marry it up with 5,000 engineering designers of depth, you have an opportunity to create value there that was not there before. I mean, Stoller was going to continue to pursue things. We would continue to pursue things. But now you marry that bandwidth and that depth up, and you might actually be able to pursue and capture things that were not there before. And so in that case, it makes sense for us to bring that together. In the DOE space, there's going to be several recompetes of several of their sites over the next 5 years or so. And we see that while the total dollar value is kind of, eye-wateringly large, participation in that is going to be substantially more than what we've seen before from our business standpoint. So that just seemed to make sense for us to go down that path and open up that channel. We took another step towards the oil and gas space in May, where we said, okay, we can open another channel here because this is a space where the demand for engineering talent is exceptionally high and the supply is exceptionally low. Mm-hmm. And so as we acquired Universal Pegasus in May, they have sites in Houston, Calgary, and Aberdeen. And frankly, they have engineers. They have over 1,000 engineers and designers all over the world. They understand how to be successful in that business, and we can bring a solid balance sheet to support them, solid contact and capability for staffing to support them, and engineering disciplines that they don't have that they can use. And we've already had cases where the folks in Houston or the folks in Calgary have called into our shipbuilding business and said, hey, have you got somebody that knows how to do lifting and handling, as an example? Mm-hmm. We've got a customer that has a lifting and handling issue and we'd like to apply that resource. So we've been able to do some of that. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that that's going to be another place where we're going to be able to create value that between us would not have otherwise been there. But in the end, this is a long game, right? And my business in shipbuilding for the last 30 years has been focused on process. How do we do what we do and how do we do it better? If you look at our R&D investments, it's really, we invest in some gadgets and gizmos along the way, but really it's about how we're going to invest in the TV screen for the welder so he can weld better, mm-hmm. right? And so we make those investments. We're looking at a Pentagon that's going to move to a more competitive environment. And it's going to move to an environment where commercial standards are going to come more into play. Well, you can just stand up and say, okay, we're going to be more competitive and we're going to be more commercial. And now you run the risk of being, the guy that ran up the hill and nobody followed him up the hill. But if you bring into your organization the culture of an organization that every single day the folks in that organization are waking up and their first thought is, how do I run faster? How do I outrun the other guy? And you bring that, that's what's happening in the oil and gas space. And you bring that mindset and you start to, sure, we can support from a staffing support or financial support to that space. But the next thing that happens is it starts to infect back into our space. And so you could think of that as sort of a vaccination, if you will.
Okay, another good metaphor. So that segues to something else I wanted to ask you about, not as an AirStats equity analyst, but because I think it's a strategic question, and that is directly, what is your capital deployment strategy? Part of it was buying a couple companies outside your main lane, but what's the whole of that story?
We've tried to be pretty clear that we're going to continue to be very balanced. We need to invest in our Navy facilities to continue the franchise that we have. I mean, we're a principal partner with the Navy and the fleet that they build today. There's no future for this business that doesn't see that that's going to be the case in 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 years. And so we will continue to be investing in our facilities. We will bring our shareholders along, at an appropriate pace. And we will continue to think our way through, are there those kinds of investments where we are a better owner of that business that takes advantage or opens a channel or creates value that was not there otherwise. If all we do is go and acquire a bunch of companies that there's no reason for us to own them over anybody else, then that doesn't make any sense. But in a case where we have a capability inside of our government business, or even if we have a capability in, say, Universal Pegasus that now could be married up with a different capability in the oil and gas space. I mean, I think that we're going to be open to those opportunities, but we're going to do that with a pretty clear-eyed view of the risk of that. I understand that defense companies have got a pretty checkered record of being able to do this, and I think that one of the challenges is that when defense companies have tried to do this and it hasn't gone well, and you look at the times when defense companies do this and it goes well, what's the difference? I think there's two things. One is when it doesn't go well, sometimes it is because the defense company went in and said, because I can build aircraft carriers, I can do anything else. And they go into this green field, if you will, and say, okay, I'm here. And they find out that, you got a lot of capability, but you've been thinking about process for 30 years, and we're thinking about efficiencies here, and things fall apart. So we're avoiding that. And the second thing that they do is they make the mistake of going into those spaces and saying, if I can be in charge on an aircraft carrier, I can be in charge in this space. And so our approach has been, we're not looking to go out and be in charge. We're looking to apply our capability to legitimate partners who already know how to be successful in that space. If they already, and Universal Pegasus knows how to be successful in that space, SM Stoller knows how to be successful in the DOE space. Now you've got that part of it as part of your portfolio. Now you can figure out the best ways to support that and be successful. Is that going to be the principal driver of our overall capital deployment? Frankly, no. Because if you list the first 10 things that have to happen between now and 2020 for my business, Mark had kind of talked to him about before. We got to finish CVN 78. We got to get a contract for CVN 79. There's probably a long lead contract in there for CVN 80. There's a refueling contract for 73. There's the next block of submarines needs to be done. ORP has to happen. The Amphib LPD 28 needs to happen. The follow-on LXR program has to happen. LHA 8 will be up there, and there's a competition for destroyers. I just rattled off the 10 top things that have to happen for my business in the next 5 years. I didn't mention Keystone, and Universal Pegasus is a key supplier to the Keystone project, right? So when we say balanced, you start with the capital and investment in our process to preserve that franchise with our Navy customer. We will look for opportunities to give our capabilities other customers, if that makes sense, and we're going to bring our shareholders along.
somewhat apropos of this theme, I wonder if I could draw you out on what you're trying to do at Avendale, which also has an energy angle to it, which I hadn't heard until I did a little homework for our conversation.
Right.
So I think it's an interesting story,
Yeah.
although maybe a developing one.
I mean,
Go
it's a tough story. You know, it's 4 years ago when we were part of Northrop Grumman, we made the decision. It became pretty clear that there just was not enough Navy work to preserve that facility. And if you go back, when we built 600 ship Navy back in the 80s, we had 6 major shipyards doing that, right? Avendale was one of the 6.
Right.
This is the first of those 6 to actually face the prospect of not having business. And so working your way through the what do you do with a site like that, and how do you manage your way through that has been quite a challenge. What we always said from the beginning was the 2 things. First of all, when this decision was made, I actually went to the Northrop Grumman board and I said, it's not conventional, but I need you to make sure that we leave the 2 ships that are there to finish there. Because usually when a business
Which
goes,
were
it was the LPD 23 and LPD 25.
Okay.
You know, there were 2 reasons for that. One was if we picked those ships up and stopped them in there and tried to go take them to Ingalls, it would have been so disruptive to Ingalls, and we were just starting the recovery at Ingalls, you know, to get that sorted out, and we didn't need to add that complexity to what was happening at Ingalls. And so that was sort of my first motive for that. But the second motive was I knew it would take, you know, 3+ years to do that, 4 years as it turned out, and I could use that time to try to figure out what to do with the site. Now, we tried everything.
The assets are on your balance sheet?
Yes.
Or Navy?
No, they're
does
ours.
Navy-
They're ours.
they're
They
yours.
belong to us, yeah. And it's about, you know, 260 acres. It's on the west bank of the Mississippi River. It's, you know, it's been, at the time that the announcement was made in 2010, it was the largest employer in the state of Virginia. And, I mean, state of Louisiana, sorry.
Yep.
And so it's been really, really challenging. And as we've worked our way through that, we've said that if we're going to successfully redeploy that, now think back to what I just said. If you're going to do this, you don't want to really be the guy in charge, and you need to partner with somebody that really knows how to be successful in a different space, right? So we have picked up a lot of rocks and looked under the rock to see what we could find. In fact, I even picked up the commercial shipbuilding rock again for a few months and then put that one back down. That one was kind of hot and, you know, didn't hang on to that one for very long. But we looked. We looked. We tried all that sort of thing. Where we are today on that is we're finishing up. In fact, we're pretty much done with all of the Navy work that's going on in that site. And so we're pretty close to now closing that. But we're doing a study with Kinder Morgan on how do you redeploy that site and what's the best way to use a site like that that's located on the west bank of the Mississippi.
For those who don't know that brand, Kinder Morgan
Kinder Morgan is you know, one of the most successful companies in the oil and gas space. They operate just about every aspect of the oil and gas space they're involved in, and operate terminals and storage and warehouse around the world in support of that. And it's you talk about a credible partner. There's probably no more credible partner in oil and gas than Kinder Morgan.
Okay.
So more to come. We haven't figured out yet exactly how that's going to play out, but that's where it stands.
Yep. Let me turn to, and I will take questions from the audience. We got a lot of breathing space here, so just stand by and let me run through a couple other things. I'm interested in a little bit more discussion about your relationship with your primary customer, the U.S. Navy and the Pentagon. You know, again, in part because I'm just picking up one of the primary themes of this series and of practically every conversation that I'm party to around here in Washington. And I guess what I'm particularly interested in with respect to you and your business is that you're a unique, not every company I would say this of, you're a unique company, right? You are a, let's politely call it a sole source supplier, or nearly so, of a couple of major products in the U.S. arsenal, and a customer who itself, right, under the guise of better buying power, is trying to flex its monopsony, to use a fancy word, power a little bit. How is that relationship, that monopsony versus, again, polite term, sole supplier, working out? Has it changed? Is it the same? Is there something at play right in this juncture?
You know, it's a dynamic relationship. I would say that when we think about negotiating our contracts, you know, a lot of folks would say, well, the negotiation is about how do you set the price. And for us on some of the contracts you talk, like the carrier contract in particular, it's really not about price. It really is about coming in and settling in on a scope of work and an agreement on how much risk there is in that scope. Because you know, everybody kind of knows what the budget is. We know what the cost cap is. We know what our portion of it is. We you know, when you go to sit down to do this negotiation, the cards are all kind of up on the table, right? At least in terms of how much money is in the room.
Yeah.
And so now, how do you take that and decide how does that translate into scope and risk and return on that risk, and how do you adequately create a profile that makes sense for both the taxpayers and the company? It's a challenge, and that discussion is exactly what I was talking about when you say that when I point out that, you know, our government operates on an annual budget and expense kind of mindset, and we are operating on a investment and return mindset, and that translation is how much scope do I get, how much risk am I taking, and how much return do you get on that kind of a risk. That's pretty tough, and when you go and stick on top of that, you know, in the case of the carriers, the taxpayers have actually been very emphatic about, and we are not going to pay any more than this much, and so they've created cost caps, and so here we are in the last you know, year and a half or so, less than year and a half of the Ford delivery. And everybody on the program is committed to getting the ship done for less than the cost cap.
Right.
That cost cap was set in 2006. That at the same time that cost cap was set, the taxpayers set another cost cap for the 79. So we're sitting here negotiating the 79 for a ship that's going to deliver in the early 20s, and the you know, the boundary condition was set in 2006. And so that makes for a really tough negotiation, And what it points out is that the real competition on those parts of my business are not with, as you point out, there's nobody else that's going to build an aircraft carrier, but the competition is with the budget. And the competition is with other folks who are looking for pieces of the budget. And so we've got to figure out how to be that affordable.
So the several indicators that have come through the Atlantic Council and elsewhere suggest that I like your formulation of the contracting folks being them who have to translate between return on investment and program price budget versus cost execution. The several indicators is that it's bad. The government is bad at this and getting worse. Now, I'm not asking you necessarily to criticize your customer, but let me flavor the question by saying, when I was in government, I thought NAV CO8 was a darn good monopsonist, and I wonder, is NAV CO8 a darn good monopsonist, or are things bad and getting worse in their capacity to make that critical translation?
Well, I'm glad you didn't
On
ask me
nuclear
to,
ships,
yeah,
at least.
Right. So I think that you know, there's two pieces of the conversation with the citizens of the United States that could be improved.
Okay.
Okay. One is the budgeting process itself. You know, when the cost cap for the carrier was set in 2006, the budget for the carrier was actually set many years before that, right? And so by the time we didn't sign the contract for detailed design and construction on the Ford until 2008. And by the time you get to the place where you're, you know, the process that we have, by the time you get to the place where you're actually negotiating, you know, our piece of it, you're many years away from when the first estimate was put together and a budget was created.
The GAO baseline, if I may invoke it, right?
Whatever. Well, it's actually it's the first time it shows up in the fit-up is kind of where it goes. And so if you were to go and go back to the original set of assumptions that were made to create that number in the fit-up, and you were to say, okay, how many of those that was in 2002 or 3, and how many of those have actually played out and are we living through and turned out to be correct in 2014 or will be correct in 2016? I'm going to predict that would be a very, very short list. And so the question of how do you get that process to be, for there to be more accountability in that process, because it's there's a lot of time that removes the budgeting process from the execution process. And how do you create more accountability back? You know, if you go into a program, as I said before, you go into a program and you get it wrong, you get the budgeting process wrong. If you get it wrong on the low side, you're a bum, because the risk of running over and the fact that you run over is a lot higher, so you ran over your budget, you're a bum. If you get it wrong on the high side, you're a hero, right? But you don't have this kind of money sitting around that you can allow everybody to be wrong on the high side.
And no one's accountable for what you could have bought with the money you didn't
Right, so this budgeting thing, this challenge of getting the estimates right and getting the budget right and finding some way to create some more dynamism in there and accountability in there is something that I think, I don't have a solution for it. I just see that as being something that overwhelms the process that goes forward. And then, you know, the second thing is that when we actually have a conversation with the taxpayers about what it is they're buying, we don't do a very good job of describing how much risk there is in what we're buying for that price. So if I sign a contract, I sign a contract and says I'm going to get it done for this target price. I have a path to get it done for that price. I also have agreed that there's a set of risk, that I have to retire that risk. And I may have to retire, you know, 80% of the risk to get to that price, or 50% of the risk, or 20% of the risk, or 100% of the risk, right? To get to the target price in there. But if I have to retire 50% of the risk to get to the target price, and I only retire 40% of it, I'm a bum, right? And we're moving into an environment where I think that we would be happy if the risk was at 50%, because I think the risk is going to be in the 80 to 100%. And you're going to be sitting here now making decisions where, you know, I'm going to sign a contract with I have to retire 100% of the risk to be on budget. Right. And boy, if my guys are great, and the shipbuilders, you know, I got plenty of time to tell you how great the shipbuilders are. They retire 90% of the risk, then we're bums.
Right. And by this term retire risk, just in palpable terms, is I'll be able to get this material cost to thus, I'll be able to weld this kind of a seam at this, is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, you know, especially on a platform where you are putting in new technologies, you're going to, you know, we put in, well, in fact, some new technology here, right, Roger? And you know, you make some assumptions on how that's going to go. And the one thing that I know is that when you make those assumptions, you're going to be wrong. You either got it way right, you know, with a lot of margin, or you got it way wrong with a lot of miss. Yeah. It's hardly ever that you get the assumption exactly right.
The only thing you know for sure is it'll be wrong.
It'll be wrong, right? So that's the challenge. And the hard part is, how do you have that conversation on the front end? I'm going to pretend to be a little naive here and say we ought to be able to have that conversation. But the realist part of me says that if you start having that conversation and suddenly programs that we've always been able to get done somehow, we start to recognize how much risk there is in there. I'm reminded when I came to Washington, 25 years ago, I was told about the Serengeti rule. The Serengeti rule is if it limps, it dies.
Ah, yes.
Right? And so if you have a program that suddenly starts to limp in this environment, you are creating hazard to the program. So how do we have a conversation where we can actually talk about the risk that there is in this program without creating the machinery to force the program off the table? That, I think, that's to me, those are the two parts of this. Whether you're a monopoly and monopsony kind of relationship, or even if you're in an environment where you've had a competition for a program and the program is planned out and now you're trying to move into some kind of production run, how do you have that conversation with the organization, with the country?
Permit me to speculate that maybe the oil and gas industry has figured out how to manage this in a way that you could draw back into your business. With one last question, I will one last of my own question. I'll open up the conversation to questions from those of you in the audience. My last question is this: in a platform that's going to last 50 years. Among today's buzzwords is modularity. We had the DARPA director here on this stage 6 months ago, and she had some almost truly fantastic ideas for, well, actually not just ideas. She was investing in technologies that would enable defense systems, my words, to keep pace with Moore's Law, almost literally. Is there, in this latest class of CVNs that are moving into trials, is there something about modularity that they have deliberately been designed to accommodate?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the most obvious example is we have, so many times we've delivered an aircraft carrier only to have it go over to Norfolk, and the first thing that happens is they rip something out because they got to put a new system in it.
Right.
And that happens a lot in the combat system and in the communication systems. What we did was we stepped back from that. This is one of those examples of work that we did that was really not process related, but we stepped back and said, how do we create a space that's reconfigurable? How do we take this open architecture idea that everybody's using in weapons and sensors and communication systems, how do we take that and turn that into the platform? And we actually, our guys sat down and figured out how to create a space that's like this, that has heat, power, and light for whatever systems you want to put in there, and it's shock qualified and shock tested. And we've demonstrated that our apprentices can go in and take a space that's this size. We can turn it into a combat center, and in 8 hours we can turn it into a special forces meeting room or a SCIF or whatever it is that they need. But the main thing is you don't have to go and cut foundations out.
Literally.
Literally, you don't have to cut them out. You don't have to. You just you bring it back in. You use the. I mean, there's fixtures that you have to use, and it's a special equipment. But you can bring it in and you can set it up, and it's shock qualified and it's hardened and it's ready to go and will be, that's one of those life cycle savings ideas that's going to pay off for 50 years. That's just one example.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
there's lots
Thanks.
more.
Okay, first hand I see is Harlan Ullman. Although please identify yourself, just as I implored everyone to do. Here's the microphone.
I'm Harlan Ullman with the Atlantic Council. Thank you for your comments. I'm taken with the long view. My question, Mike, really is for a slightly shorter version of the long view, the next 2 to 5 years. When you were talking, I was thinking about Roy Ash at Linton Industries 40 years ago and Gerstner at IBM. And you had the defense company that was going to be a conglomerate, and then you had Gerstner who shifted IBM to something else. I would guess in the next 2 to 5 years you're going to see really dramatic cuts in procurement in defense and DOE. And I would be surprised to see a Navy of above 250 ships maybe. Now, if that's true and you have a real compression over the next couple of years, how do you see making this shift to what Steve alluded to, which was the oil, gas, and energy sector, which to me is an area for prime growth? Because what you're suggesting, it seems to me, between the lines, is looking to straddle both the private and public sector as a means of hedging your strategy in the event that defense does head south. Do I understand that correctly, or am I exaggerating the case?
Yeah, I'm not doing it so much because I think defense is going to go south. I don't share your view that we're headed to 250 ships or 200 ships. What I look at is when we stack up the priority, you stack up the order of battle in the 300 ship Navy today, and you start with, you put on top of that list the most complex ships there are. Carriers, submarines, destroyers, amphibs. What you see is you see a lot of alignment in the industry and the Navy around those. Not only are the most complex platforms, they actually are our priorities. And so when you have the marriage between the Navy and the industry saying that these are also, the Navy recognizing that the complexity is their advantage and the complexity makes it a priority. I think that there's a scrum below that level. I think the amphibs are kind of in the mix there of the scrum, but I think the small surface combatant is in there. I think some auxiliaries are in there. That's where the real battle is going to be over what are these platforms are going to look like. I think it's pretty clear based on what Mark said here today that there's a strong commitment on the part of the country to stay with 11 aircraft carriers. And if you stay with 11 aircraft carriers, you are setting the size of the Navy to be something that supports that. whether it's 306 ships or 285 ships, I'm not sure how you count it, but I think that creates a structure there. So I'm not looking to take my business and go over to the oil and gas space. I actually, as I said, I believe that our partnership is the key franchise. Our partnership with the Navy is the key franchise of this business, and there is no future that I see where that's not true. If we are successful with DOE or we're successful with oil and gas, it'll be on the margins, and it'll be incrementally helpful. But it'll be helpful both ways. It'll help us with some low capital investment kind of returns in the business, which we can use. It'll also help us with our learning how to think a little bit differently about our business. So.
There's a question, gentleman in uniform in the back row.
Per Rasmussen from the Danish Embassy in Washington, D.C. Thank you for a very enlightening presentation. I hear two things. One is going towards commercial standards, and I hear modularity. In Denmark, we've done those things for the past 35 years. I just wonder, if it isn't made here, it doesn't work, why don't you look around? Why do you create your own organization to look at these things? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that we're operating in an environment where we have some legal structures that force us down that path. We have 5,000 suppliers in this country. We don't have very many suppliers that are not in the U.S. and that we have some. The taxpayers have made some rules about how we can engage. I do think, though, that things like commercial standards and modularity are going to be brought to bear to wrestle with the size of the budgets and how much of the budget can be applied to the platforms. But I think that I also think that if you look around the industry, you're hearing us talk a little bit about oil and gas. If you scratch out oil and gas and you put in, pick another word, international, the discussion's the same. It's other companies are using the international space as a way to describe they're going to open up another channel for their capability. In shipbuilding, I'm not a believer that the international Navy shipbuilding business is a real opportunity. I just don't think that it is. And I'm convinced, having scars, that the commercial shipbuilding business is not a real opportunity for my business. And so we've had to try to figure out a different way to open up a channel.
Is there any reason at all to worry about the flip side of that, which is commercial hulls being sold to the Navy? Hulls, maybe just.
I think it's about mission, because I think that there's a really good program that's going on today, the MLP program, that not in my business, but our friends at General Dynamics have got a nice program there where they have a ship that's built to some commercial standards, and it's providing some capability to the Marines that the Marines need, and they're doing it in a pretty affordable way. But that's not a platform that's going to go and knock a door down if you need to knock a door down, which the Marines get called on to do from time to time. And so you have to kind of step back to what is the mission, and do you have the survivability to perform that mission if you just are relying on commercial standards? And a lot of the missions that we have laid out there won't lend themselves to that.
Okay. There's a question in the fourth row, right in the middle, please.
Andrea Shalal with Reuters. Mike, I wanted to follow up on this kind of ongoing discussion about innovation and how that applies to your sector specifically. Yesterday, Bob Martinez of CSBA talked about a report in which he sort of focused on the extended range, unmanned capabilities, and sort of said along the way that perhaps some of the current modernization programs would have to be scrapped. One of the things he mentioned was amphibs. You mentioned that amphibs are in that scrum space. I mean, how are you translating all of this discussion about innovation into what you're going to be doing in that very long view? And where are the connections, and what does it mean that China and is developing missiles that can be, that will make those ships that you build less safe?
Wow, there's a lot in that question.
Yeah, just a couple minutes.
Yeah, I should just start out by saying, I'm not really a geostrategist of some kind, and I don't really get too involved in the discussions inside the Pentagon about missions and capabilities and, and counter capabilities and those kinds of things. Where that translates into my business, it turns into the requirements of the ship, right? We get a set of requirements, or we engage with our customer on what are the requirements of the ship. Often we don't know how those requirements trace back to whatever the perceived threat might be. And so I'm going to be a little standoffish on this and say I'm not exactly sure how all of that comes together. What we do is we look at the sets of requirements and we try to identify those requirements that we would suggest, and we have done this on every ship that we build. We do go back to the Navy and we say, here's a set of requirements that if these were changed, could reduce the cost of this ship. From our perspective, they don't change the functionality of the ship or the capability of that ship to meet what we think the mission is. Mm-hmm. The Navy will do a review on that, and then in some cases they accept it, in some cases they say, no, we have to have it this way. But that's our attempt, is to kind of try to keep going at what are those things that are really driving the cost, and can we change that, or can we approach that a different way and get at it in a more efficient way? So. Beyond that, it's really about what are the requirements that come to us. We do have discussions sometimes that are nice and interesting to talk about what's the Navy after next look like, but that becomes really hard to act on. Mm-hmm. And from my standpoint, the most important thing for us to do is to recognize we've been doing process for 30 years. We've got to do more than that now. Because the environment in the future, whatever the missions, whatever the capabilities are, it's going to require efficiencies, and we've got to become ever more efficient every single day, and so that's kind of the way we're going after it.
We have time for one last question from the second row, Ralph Crosby.
Hey, Mike, Ralph Crosby.
Ralph, good to see you.
Good to see you. Down at the kind of the base level, and to go to the point you made at the end about efficiencies being important. Steve tried to get at the question of how good is your customer. I kind of think of the customer. I mean, look, if you want to run up San Juan Hill, you don't have to just have 5,000 shipbuilders with you. You got to have 4,000 GAO, DCA, DCMA, contract managers with you. And I think one of the fundamentals of kind of defense contracting that we face going forward is, do we have the competencies to really execute what, after you get past the requirement stuff, what we commit to do? And for example, on the side that I was always in, I think the U.S. Air Force at one point in time had developed the most exquisite capability of best value contracting that ever existed, which has now disappeared. And I'm wondering, disappeared and been disavowed. And I'm wondering, in the sense of innovation, efficiency, and so forth, are we doing enough as the customer, the government customer, to ensure we have the enlightenment and the capacities to get those efficiencies and the leverages that we ought to get for the dollars that we spend in your business?
Wow. Ralph, that cuts across not just defense. That cuts across everything that the government's involved in. Right.
The defense is the best at buying things of any part of this U.S. government.
That's true.
Let's talk about that.
Okay, so I can figure out where to start with that. The challenge that I think we have is that we are moving to a place where, kind of back to, we're institutionalizing so many short-term things that it makes some of these long-term investments that you're talking about really hard to come to fruition. I know of a case, without naming any names, I know of a case where a company won a competition to build a prototype and worked with the government to build the prototype. When the prototype was finished, the government decided to hold a competition for the production. The other companies that were involved in this, one of them decided to go do it on their own. Mm-hmm. And as I understand it, the government company prototype team had developed this prototype towards a set of standards, but when they went to the competition, they had to relax the standards so they could have a competition. Now that makes no sense to me. You know, that if you're going to go, I mean, it's almost as if you're saying you'd be better off not to win the prototype competition so that you could go and participate in the real competition. And I think that's just an example of we're not thinking long-term enough. We're just not thinking long-term enough, and we've got rules and regulations and requirements that are causing us to institutionalize short-term thinking that's keeping us from making some of these long-term decisions. And I just think that continues. It's you know, my bottom line point here is that I don't know that other than to say I can vent about it and say it's a really bad thing. It would be nice to point out that, you know, as we go through acquisition reform, you know, there's a big challenge here in acquisition reform to try to figure out how do you get back to a place where you can think a little bit longer term about some of these programs. The ships that we build, we're not building them for this administration. We're not even building them for the next administration. We're building them for the administration after that. You know, there's a great history story of when George Washington wanted to buy the first 6 frigates in the U.S. Navy. One of his most vocal opponents was a guy by the name of Thomas Jefferson. And when Thomas Jefferson became president, what did he do? He sent the 6 frigates over to take care of the Tripoli pirates. So, I mean, you know, this is a real challenge for this country. It's a real challenge for leaders to stand up and be heard on. And it's really important, I think, for folks to stand up and make the point that you're making, Ralph.
That historical reference, I think, makes a perfect arc to the conversation, or draws the conversation to a perfect conclusion. Do you have any final words, Mike, before I thank you?
Well, I thank you. It's been a great experience, and I applaud what you and the Atlantic Council are doing here.
Thank you. Thanks again very much for coming, and thanks again to Mark Brunner for participating in the event. Thanks all of you for coming. We'll do it again probably next month or the month after. Stay tuned.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah.